Hello and welcome to Signals from the Hill. I'm Kat. I do marketing for Avery Hill Publishing. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Taki Soma about her book, Sleeping While Standing, which comes out very soon from Avery Hill. Sleeping While Standing is just one of many great books that are coming out with Avery Hill this year. Head over to averyhillpublishing.com for more information. They're also available from all good book and comic shops, and digital editions of our books can be found at our Gumroad shop. I'm here with Taki Soma, whose book Sleeping While Standing, which I have here, is coming out very soon with Avery Hill Publishing. So thank you for talking to me, Taki.
Having me.
I was reading through your book today prior to doing this, and I think one of the things that I love about it is it kind of reminds me, it kind of feels like the experience of getting to know a person in real life, because the way you've kind of done these sort of short anecdotes, it just feels like a really natural way to kind of get to know a person. Like when you meet a new person, they don't sit you down and tell you about their life from like the moment they were born until the present, leaving nothing out. It's more like you hear one little story and then another time you hear a different story, and it starts to build into this picture of the person. And I just felt like the way your book has this kind of structure of little anecdotes that's how it felt to me reading it. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does. That wasn't actually the intention starting off, but it absolutely ended up being that as a whole. After I stepped back and looked at all of the little short stories that I've drawn and written, I'm like, I'm not really sure how to make this into a linear story, really. It was so random.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I had seen a little bit of a pattern or a little bit of a rhythm that kind of made sense. So hopefully, it feels like a whole meal of a story instead of just really random.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Yeah. So, and I think I read in one of the introductions or the forewords of the book, your friend Brian saying how you had been sort of working on some of these stories for quite some time and sort of starting to share them with people. Did you sort of end up with loads more than you used for this book? Or, I mean, were you having to decide what to include and what not to include?
Yeah, that was probably the hardest thing to do, was to decide what stories to tell, because obviously, many people have many things that they've gone through in their life, and I'm a believer that any incident can be made into a story. So the story Murder was just literally it's just an experience I had just reading a newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah.
But it's just step back and just it's about reading a newspaper. It's very mundane, really. But so yeah, to decide which stories to tell and how I tell it, and which stories I just didn't feel comfortable or appropriate, or it's just too private, I guess. Making those decisions were quite hard, because I want to be an open book, but I also want to be respectful of people who might get hurt from telling these stories.
Yeah, because you come across as a very open person reading this book. You do touch on some really kind of personal stuff. Is that how you've always been as a person, just sort of happy to talk about things, or did you have to sort of come to that point?
Well, I used to be a person who hid behind comedy. So right. I answered everything in a really cheeky, funny way. And I now realize that it was just a protection. It was a shield. It was a mask I had, and I still have it. I enjoy that mask. I like it. But I also enjoy being open and being authentic, because it's therapeutic. And it just, it taught me growth as a human being. And so now I think I have a good balance of like, being open and being comfortable being open, and still have my funny side. And I don't feel like it's inauthentic to have that, I guess, a mask on, because it's part of who I am as well. So
yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting. I know a lot of people that kind of use comedy as a sort of deflector, but at the same time, humor is a way of just dealing with things in a healthy way. So it has to be a balance, I think. I listen to a lot of mental health podcasts that are kind of from America, and it always strikes me that at least the people that I hear talk on these podcasts, they're very open compared to a lot of people in the UK, because I think there are cultural differences from different parts of the world as to how willing people are to open up about personal stuff. But I don't know whether you found that do you think Americans in general are kind of more open?
Boy, that's really, I'm from Japan, and I think, if you're not Japanese, the initial impression of Japanese people are very, we're very reserved, and
I was wondering that, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if I agree. I think that's a generalization that can be applied, of course, but if you just talk to anybody individually, I think we all find that we're all just people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I don't feel like I came to America and I'm like, oh, now I know how to like be open and stuff like that. I think it was just already in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That had been in the back of my mind. I was wondering whether I see some of that kind of reserve in Japanese people similar to English people, but I think it's just person to person. And as you say, when you get to know someone one-to-one, usually people are quite open. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, the other thing that really, really fascinated me was reading in some of the introductions to your book, how much you love editing. And I think your husband Michael describes it as your mission statement. Is that right? I think that was in his intro.
Yeah, definitely.
I think also in your afterword in the book, you talk about how much you loved the working within the sort of structure you set of the 4-page limit. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that, why you enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, well, I'm really, really, really getting into writing more and more and more. I just finished teaching my second semester at Portland State University with Brian Bendis on writing comics. So I've just been immersed in thinking about and reading other, students' approach to storytelling, and I've been learning so much. And I've and I've always enjoyed writing, but I never really thought of it in such a methodical way. It was always I just kind of followed my heart, but I didn't really know why do I do the things I do? Why do I think certain things click and work? I just kind of I would just work toward something that clicks, and I don't know why or how, but I just know that if I just keep working and I just keep writing, then something will click and all of those things. But now I'm at a point where I'm actually really thinking about the why, and what works for me and what doesn't work for me. But it doesn't necessarily mean that just because I don't like it, that it doesn't, it's not, it's a bad way of approaching storytelling. So, working in 4 pages or less as a parameter to just like, it's just a rule I set just for this book, and it was just challenging enough that it really made me think about that more and more and more. Like, well, why do I have to have this line when I'm showing it here, and I only have this much room, and there's so much going on. I need that moment to really resonate, so you have to do a lot of math, actually. And it's kind of fun to make those like Lego pieces kind of fit together, and puzzle pieces fit together. Yeah, so that challenge is it kind of taps into that part of your brain where you love doing the puzzles, and like when it fits, you're just like, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think that's something I love about comics, because it just forces you to be kind of economical. I did a literature degree, and I was used to writing really long essays and just waffling, and I think I have a tendency to just waffle on and use way too many words than I need to. So comics are a great discipline for making you, like you say, examine every single word and why it's necessary and things. So yeah, I can definitely understand that. Also, I love your love of editing. For a long time I worked in a theatre, and they had really long plays. Like the plays would be 3 hours plus, sometimes 3.5 hours long, and so many times I would sit watching it going, like re-editing it in my head, going, okay, I would cut this scene, this scene needs to be cut in half, and kind of rewriting it. And yeah, they're completely different art forms, and it's quite hard to, in theatre, like if you cut a scene in half, you could cut somebody's whole part out of the show. So there's all these different considerations and things, but I always found it incredibly frustrating that things were so long-winded, which they don't tend to be in comics. It's quite a disciplined sort of art form, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't really know much about theater or theater writing at all, but I just feel like those scenes tend to be long because it's supposed to be an experience. You're not there just for to understand a storyline, there for the experience. Like you're there for every mood and every, so I think, yeah, it is different. I wonder like how differently like playwrights approach story versus like a comic writer.
Yeah, it must be very different. How much sort of feedback did you have from Ricky working on Sleeping While Standing in terms of the editing?
Not much. He's excuse me. He's pretty hands-on. He trusts, I think, his creators, and yeah, he was so easy to work with. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've lent on him a little bit with my writing, because I was always confident on the art side of things, but really not confident on the writing. So when I started writing my own stories, I wanted to have an editor helping me just look at it and decide if stuff could go. And he's been really good at that. But yeah, he's also really good if he trusts the person to just do their own work. He's perfectly happy for that to happen as well.
Yeah, no, he did make one suggestion as far as like what stories I wanted to finish off the book with. I was like, well, I have certain ideas here. Here are my ideas. And he's just like, well, yeah, maybe talk about why you like comics. And I worked on that, and that ended up being the last story in the book, because it just felt like a complete journey.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I think,
I'm really glad that he made that suggestion.
yeah. Yeah, I think he's quite good at sort of beginnings and endings and thinking about how to, you know, structure that side of things. That was another aspect of your book that I thought was really interesting and that I haven't really seen before, was the fact that you included some of the process of making the book in the narrative of the book, which I thought was so cool, because I think as a reader, it kind of just makes you feel involved, like you're watching this thing come into being, which you're reading. And I just thought that was really interesting. What made you decide to include those bits?
Are you talking about like when I talked about Friends and how he came up with the title for the book?
Yes,
that's the one.
Yes, there's that one. And then also you talk about talking to Brian and how he had a suggestion for you about including more humor and things.
Yeah, well, he was so right. Brian was so right about that. Like I said, I hide behind humor. Hiding isn't the right word. It's just, it's a big part of my life to use humor. And yeah, and I was working through a lot of dark stuff. So, you know, he's like, you're not this person. I mean, deep inside you are. Everybody has, you know, layers, absolutely. He's like, but I really need to, like, I need people to know how funny you are. And I'm like, all right. So, you know, I just thought it was funny that he talked about how dark my stories are. And then later that day, I'm like lamenting to Mike that I'm like, boy, I really have to rethink all of my stories, because, or, you know, from here on out, because I was gonna, this is the point where I was gonna go into like the darker stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe it's too much. So
Yeah.
some of the darker stuff is actually not in the book because of Brian, and I think that was a good choice.
Yeah. I mean, it can probably find its way into other projects and things in the future if that's something you want. But yeah.
And then with Ethan Johnson, he's the one who had a dream that that he, you know, came across a graphic novel, and they have my name on it, and it says "Sleeping While Standing," and he like drew a little like cover for it and stuff. Like he was like, well, it kind of looked like this and had a tree on it and blah blah blah. And I was like reading it, and I was like really like happy for you and blah 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 blah. And it just came to me through text, and I was like, oh well, at this time, like you know, I didn't have Avery Hill as my publisher yet. I was just working on these stories, just kind of whatever. And I'm like, well, if this ever gets published, I think this has to be the title. And you know, and I just thought it was such an interesting story, because and it's kind of it's a very meta way of like, oh, that's the title of this book. That's in the story, you know, it's just kind of silly. But I just thought it's just too good of a story to not tell it, you know. It felt like Kismet. It was just perfect. And then I just thought about like our friendship and like how our friendship molded my perception of what, you know, marriage and relationships are all about and stuff like that. So it was just appropriate. And of course I got his permission to use his name and his wife's name, stuff like that. So that felt good, that, I can tell the story and I have his permission. So
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting little detail. And it does, yeah, it just slots in really nicely in the story. And I think, as I said, as it almost makes you feel invested in the book, you can almost see it coming together as you're reading, which is really nice.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, one of my ultimate goal in this project was just I wanted to make connections. I wanted to have. I wanted people to feel like they know what I was feeling, because they too felt it. In different circumstances, but they understand that emotion. That it's emotions are universal, and that was like my main goal putting this book together. So yeah.
There was another thing in Brian's introduction that really interested me. He mentioned that you had been telling your friends some of these stories kind of just over the years, but that the experience of reading your comics was completely different about, when you're describing the same story. And he called it a different, what did he call it? A different kind of sharing, I think.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you make of that, why it would be such a different experience hearing a story firsthand from someone versus how they've decided to sort of draw and write it in comic form.
Oh, interesting. I suppose because he's a storyteller himself, and a really good one. I think he's got a future in comics, but who knows? And I think, he's actually a really good storyteller, like verbally himself. He's very animated, and he knows how to tell, go into anecdotes and just make it fun and punchy. And but it is different when you hear it in person and you get the whole the voice and the and how animated they are, or the volume of their voice and stuff. You get the whole experience. And when it comes to comics, you have to approach the story a little bit differently, because it is a visual storytelling, but it is static. And you have to find that voice through the words that you choose, and the layouts that you choose, and the body language that you use and stuff like that. So it is absolutely different than just hearing it from a person's point of view, because it's, when I tell a story, it's pretty casual. I don't really think about how do I tell this in like a short spurt of however many words, and how do I make sure that it resonates, and how do I make sure that it's got a rhythm and all that stuff. Like, I don't really think about that in person. So yeah, it is different. Like, it's more thoughtful, I think. When you have to write it and put it through a comic book, sequential storytelling, it is different. So yeah,
I think comics are a really kind of clever form of communication. It's somehow just really visceral, and you get the words and the pictures working together. So I felt like that was just him commenting on how powerful your comics work is, in the sense that he already knew the story, but it was like he was getting a whole different perspective on it in the way you were telling it.
I like your answer so much better. I'm gonna go with that one.
Yeah, you should find out what he meant. But yeah, I just thought it was a really nice comment, and really interesting too, thought-provoking. The other thing that I found interesting in, I think it was in Michael's piece of writing in the book, was he talked about how you'd had long periods of not really making any work. That was something I could relate to as well, because and this ties into, I wanted to ask about your route into comics and how you sort of got there, because I know for me, I had a long period where I'd always done art and drawing, but I didn't know what to do with it. And your comic, where you talk about going into advertising because you were just like, well, this isn't a job, this isn't a career. I had all those feelings, and people would just say, well, can't you just be an artist? And I was like, well, you try that and see how easy that is.
Try that and see if you can pay your bills.
Yeah, exactly. So I had many years of doing other things and not really, and also I felt like for a long time I didn't really know what I wanted to say. So it took me years to reach a point where I felt like I had something to say even. But he pointed out that even when you're not making work, you're kind of doing a lot of thinking, and you're sort of almost telling stories in your head anyway. So yeah, I was just interested in that and how you sort of found your way into comics, because you mentioned that it was quite a sudden change in the book from when you began to do your advertising sort of studies. So how did that actually happen, and what was your route into actually making comics?
Well, so I've always been an artist. It was just in my blood, it was in my bones. So it was not a question of, do I want to be an artist or not? I just came out of my mama as an artist, but I, like, nobody else in my family or really like close friends or anything, I didn't have any artist friends to aspire towards, or have any kind of like direction to say, oh, I think I want to do that and make a living doing whatever they're doing. So I felt really, really lost in art. I absolutely love making art. I love telling stories, but I also wanted to not starve. I wanted to pay my bills and not have a heart attack every month. So yeah, it was incredibly difficult to make that leap. But so I started reading American comics in my mid-20s. And I started going to an advertising school, and I was working in an ad agency in my late 20s. And while I was going to school, like, one person just pulled me aside and they're like, look, this is not an insult. I just think that you don't belong here. You love comics so much, it's all you talk about. Maybe you should think about it. And the next day I dropped out and I started pursuing comics.
Wow.
Because he was right. It's profound. He was absolutely right. So I was like, well, I guess I'll starve, but I'll be happy, was what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So and then I just got myself like a reception job, and so I can just like have the bandwidth left after work to just start working on my career towards comics. So yeah, that's what I did. I just got a mundane job, and I just started working towards getting a job in comics.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that you have to kind of go all or nothing, but I had a similar job for almost 20 years, for 18 years, which was just the easiest job in the world. And it was something where I could just have enough energy left to do my work, but also not worry that I was going to be on the street. And I did that for 18 years and I loved it. I didn't want to leave, but I just lost the job, and then I was forced to kind of figure it out. But I think people have this idea if you're going to go for comics, you have to find a way to do it full time. And I don't know, that's putting a lot of pressure on, I think, as long as you can make work, you know, somehow.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of professional comic artists, or not just artists, but comic book creators, have other jobs, and or they have a spouse who can support, you know, the family. You know, like a combined income is, you know, and then there are really successful ones who just are independently wealthy, just off of making comics, which is great too. So there's this wide range of like possibilities that of, you know, success in comics. But in the end, I was like, well, it'll be nice to be like independently wealthy off of comics, but that isn't my goal. You know, it'd just be nice. My goal is I just wanted to make comics. So I think having that kind of attitude really helped in my confidence in you know, going into it, because I didn't have high expectations of like, I'm gonna be a millionaire and, you know, whatever. Because if you did, then I'm failing hard.
Yeah. I mean, when I did illustration work before I got into comics, and one of the first things that happened was I went to Borders bookshop while it still existed, and I went into a section that had some books on doing illustration as a career, and the first book I picked up just said, if you're thinking about going into illustration as a career, don't do it. It's one of the hardest things. And it was so depressing to read, but at the same time I was kind of grateful that I heard it. That was the first thing I heard, and so that kind of set my expectations at that level. And I was just kind of like, well, if I do try, it'll be really hard, but I still kind of want to try.
Yeah,
so it's helpful.
I think it's satisfying, you know, to I think some people say don't do it because it's hard. It's just kind of weeding out any like high expectations out of, you know, career path that can be very, very difficult to climb. Yeah. But if you're still willing to do it, I think, you know, you have a pretty good attitude toward the medium.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, I'm so impressed with the creativity of your kind of page designs for this book. That like every story has a sort of different approach visually, and you've got some really, really creative kind of moments with what you do with panels and the design. And just in my head at the moment is the one where you talk about how your cat went missing while in a locked room. And you've got like the missing cat on the side of the milk carton and stuff, and it's just so funny. And then a whole detective thing with corkboard and pins. It's so amazing. I wonder do you sort of do a lot of exploratory sort of sketching, or is this just kind of in your head and it just kind of goes onto the page?
Yeah, I'm not a sketcher. I have a sketchbook, and I've had this sketchbook for like 3 years now, I think. There's nothing in it. Literally nothing in it. I'm just not a doodler. I'm a workman artist. Like if there's a purpose to drawing, then I'll do it.
I'm the same, actually. This is really reassuring for me to hear, because that's how I am. And I sometimes worry that I'm kind of like, oh, maybe I'm not doing it right. Like other people have, you know, will sketch a page hundreds of times and have all these ideas and finally narrow down to the thing they want to do, whereas I draw the first thing that comes into mind. I just think it, draw it, and that's done. But I just think everyone works differently, and what matters is that you're doing the work. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But
Yeah,
It's really
absolutely.
nice.
Like my husband is a complete opposite. Like he's
Mhm,
a doodler. Like he has to. I think he just constantly needs to draw. Like
mhm,
that's just, you know, even more than myself. Like I'm like, I am an artist, but he's like, that's every molecule in his body is an artist. He
mhm,
has to he has to be drawing. um I'm more drawn towards um the aspect of like storytelling,
mhm,
and um and because I think that's a form of art in itself.
mhm,
um and more I'm more drawn towards like writing than drawing,
mhm,
um especially because the way like I said, I draw what I have to draw, but
mhm.
I'm not a doodler and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm starting to really like understand my brain a little bit, and I'm like, oh, you want to do that more than you want to draw. Okay, all right. So but drawing for me is, it's just in me. So I may not be the best artist, um, but it is something that I think it just has to be done.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm very similar. I don't feel like I enjoy it a huge amount. I love when I've done a drawing and I'm really proud of it. I'm like, yeah, this is good. But I don't love the process. I don't sit down going, oh, I'm so excited. I get to draw for however many hours. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like you, I kind of feel a bit of a like compulsion. Like I'll probably always do it. But it is, yeah, it's funny. I guess everyone
Yeah.
has their own way of working.
Yeah.
And that reminded me, you mentioned Michael and how at the end of the book or maybe it's in his, no, it's in his forward introduction, he mentions that you're working on a graphic novel together. I wonder, you probably can't share much of what that's about, but how has that been to work on a book with your husband?
Well, we worked on books together before.
Oh yes.
Yeah, well, comics,
Mm.
you know. So this is it's about Van Gogh,
Oh.
and uh, I just this is the first time though that I'm the only writer and he's the artist. It used to be like we worked together before where I would we would co-write, and he'd usually do the art and I'll usually do the colors.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is entirely like I wrote it, he's gonna draw it, and I'm gonna color it.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and the script is done,
Mhm.
so we just have to kind of, well, he's done his part. I still have to do the coloring to so we can start pitching to publishers and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm continuously working on other projects too. Like I have 2 other projects that I'm kind of starting to like plot out and stuff so I can start writing. And I'm coloring 2 series right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I really look forward to seeing that book. It sounds great. And I think it's lovely that you have that relationship where you can work together creatively. It's really lovely.
Yeah, it is actually, if I recommend it to everyone. Really. If you can get yourself a Michael Oeming, then do that and make comics together, because it's an incredible experience. We get along really well, we respect each other, and we kind of trust each other. So the working, together on any projects, it's really stressless. Like it's really seamless. It's really easy. So I'm really, really thankful for that.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I'll make sure that people, that your links are underneath this so people can find you. Do you have a website?
I don't.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, I mean, I'm on social, but bandwidth, I don't
yeah.
have much. So
Well, yeah,
yeah,
you have to
I
focus
don't
on.
have a website, but maybe someday. But
Okay.
right now, I just have social, and it's Taki Soma.
Okay. I'll include the links and the link to buy your book, which is fantastic. Everyone should read it. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Thanks again to Taki for talking to me, and thank you for listening.